The first snow came like a thief, silent, fast, and cruel. Not one man in the entire Timber Hollow Valley had predicted it, not the ranchers up by the ridge, not the cattlemen further down by the low creek, and certainly not the men who'd spent all summer laughing at Eleanor Tappan for digging into the earth like a prairie dog. No one expected it to come that early, least of all those who had spent more time drinking and building saloons than sealing their roofs or banking their cabins. But Eleanor wasn't like them, and as the wind came hurling down the mountain pass, stripping trees bare in a single night, she was already below ground, dry, warm, and listening to the howls through a thick sod ceiling that barely trembled. 3 days earlier, they had laughed at her again. "Woman's lost her mind," said Buck Tuller, spitting into the mud. He leaned against his wagon while watching Eleanor shovel more clay from the sloped entrance of what looked, to them, like a rabbit's hole halfway down the side of a knoll. "Tried to tell her, ain't no man gonna marry a woman living in a dirt cave." "Doubt she's looking," muttered Lyle Granger, smirking. "But hell, she's always been peculiar. Remember when she patched her boots with birch bark?" They laughed then, the kind of laugh that rolls easy when there's no real danger in the air, when winter's still far off and men feel big again. They laughed the same way they had when Eleanor first arrived the year prior, alone on a borrowed mule, dress frayed at the hem, with a trunk of canned goods and 2 sharpened spades. They laughed because they didn't understand her, because they didn't know what she knew. No one had seen the way Eleanor's husband died that second winter back in Kansas, not of cold directly, but of fever from wet clothes and lungs that never dried. No one knew she had buried 2 children after their toes turned black, then their legs, then everything else. She didn't tell anyone what she'd already survived. She just built. The first frost had hit a full week before the others noticed. Eleanor had spent that week inside her earth-sheltered cabin, stacking split logs neatly in the recessed alcove by her cooking hearth, checking the flue of the pipe chimney she'd crafted out of salvaged stove parts and scrap tin. The roof, really a thick sod layer matted with straw and covered with packed dirt, held steady above hand-hewn cedar beams. Her cabin didn't rise above the land but sat within it, hidden, silent, warm. The others? They were still hunting for firewood, patching leaks, cursing half-frozen nails with split fingers. Their cabins sat tall and proud and useless. She had watched them scramble, and she had said nothing. But the storm didn't just settle. It grew. By the 4th day, white coated everything. The ridge trails vanished. Smoke thinned from most chimneys. The wind carried cries that faded too quick to find their source. Men started showing up in the night. The first came limping. Eleanor opened her door to find Emery Field, tall, proud Emery, who once declared she had no business doing a man's work, cradling a frost-bitten hand and begging for dry clothes. She didn't ask questions. She simply helped him down the slope, into the trench entrance framed with bark-lined timbers, through the heavy blanket that served as her second windbreak, and into the warmth of a space so quiet it nearly stunned him. "You got heat?" he muttered. His lips were blue. She ladled broth from a small pot hanging over the fire. "And food." The silence of her underground home was broken only by the faint hiss of wind through the stovepipe. Candles flickered. Shelves, dug into the walls, held jars of beans and dried apples, salt pork, flatbread. She had spent the summer preparing, drying, salting, canning, sealing, and digging. Every night, while others danced or drank or flirted at the town socials, she had chipped away at the earth, stacking each rock herself, reinforcing the ceiling with scavenged boards, sealing the seams with clay and ash. The second man arrived 2 days later, then 2 more. Then came a family. By the end of the week, 7 people had crammed inside the shelter that once held just Eleanor, a spinning wheel, and her quiet prayers. None of them said much. They just stared at the way she had shaped the earth, curved walls that deflected cold, a floor of smooth stone laid atop hay, and vents that pulled smoke away cleanly. But they still didn't understand how deep her planning had gone. There was another tunnel, invisible from above, that led to a cold cache, a place she stored snow-packed meat, safely far from the main hearth's heat, and another, narrower, that sloped down into a dry crawl space packed with firewood, sealed in oilcloth. No drip ever reached it, no rats found it. She'd lined the edge with soot and ash, then watched for prints. None ever appeared. Still, they only saw what was around them. The heat, the food, the safety. They didn't see the weight she carried. On the 8th day, the snow began to cave roofs. People began to die. A neighbor's child froze to death while his parents argued whether to burn their last table leg or their blanket. A man was found in his outhouse, stiff, arms broken, trying to lift himself out. A woman died clutching a damp Bible beside a fireless hearth. The valley grew silent, but in Eleanor's home there was breath, laughter even, not loud, not careless, but the sound of survival, warm, human. When she let them eat her cornbread and sip hot water with honey, they cried. "Why didn't you tell us?" someone whispered. Eleanor stirred the fire. "You wouldn't have listened." A week later, the real test came. The firewood in her main stack ran low. Most of the men, too weak from cold and hunger, didn't offer to help, but one did. The youngest, Caleb Murch, 17, red-faced and eager. He swore he could climb up, fetch what little was left from the deadfall behind the ridge. He never came back, and that's when Eleanor made her choice. She gathered what was left: boots, oilcloth, a half loaf of cornbread, 2 small jars of bear fat, and handed them to Emery Field. "Take them," she said. "You're going after him." "I can't." "You can," she said, voice firm. "He's still breathing. And if he's not, I'll need that proof too." Then she pointed to the wall. Hidden behind a thick quilt was another door, smaller, round, camouflaged, a third tunnel, one no one had seen. She'd built it not for escape, but for retrieval. "You'll use this. Crawl out under the wind, stay low." And that's how they began to understand her, that this woman they mocked wasn't just lucky. She had outbuilt them, outsmarted them, outlived them. She was more than a homesteader. She was a survivor by design. And now, in the second week of the storm, the only living hearts in Timber Hollow were beating beneath 6 feet of earth, warmed not by hope or prayers or stubborn pride, but by a woman they all once called mad. They would never call her that again. The third tunnel opened into silence and ice. Emery Field, bundled now in every wool scrap Eleanor could spare, eased out of the round opening like a weasel from its burrow. The snow above lay heavy and wind-packed, thick as clay. There was no sound, not even birds, just the occasional groan of pines splitting under weight, and the distant shriek of the wind dragging across a frozen valley like claws across bone. He followed her instructions. "Stay low, stay moving. Use the dips between the rocks. Crawl if you must, but don't break silhouette. Don't call out." The ridgeline wasn't far, maybe a quarter mile if the wind hadn't shifted the terrain too badly, but in that snow, it may as well have been the other side of the world. Every step sank past his knees, his boots taking in cold through seams that cracked a week ago. But he kept on because the boy might still be alive, because Eleanor believed it, and because somehow after everything, after a year of mocking her, after whispering to the others that she wasn't right in the head, Emery Field believed her too. The boy's trail had vanished in the drifts. It was luck, or providence, or just the quiet sound of a single frozen breath under a pine bough that led Emery to the right spot. Caleb Murch was there, wedged beneath a leaning pine, arms tucked into his coat, face purple, breath shallow but present. Emery didn't speak. He simply reached down, rolled the boy's weight across his shoulder, and staggered back the way he came, feet barely finding their path. The tunnel seemed impossibly far now. The snow bit deeper, harsher. When they made it back, Eleanor didn't rush forward. She opened the door silently, held the quilt back, helped him in. Then she laid the boy by the fire, pulled off his boots, and got to work. The others watched her, closely now, the way a fox watches the owl. With reverence, with fear, she rubbed the boy's feet with bear fat, gently, over and over until the color stopped draining. She brewed willow bark tea, forcing it past his cracked lips. She sat beside him through the night while the wind above screamed like it was mourning something old and angry. "Where'd you learn all that?" someone asked quietly. "My mother," Eleanor said, never taking her eyes from the boy. "And after her, I had time to learn the rest." It was the first thing she had shared about her life since arriving in Timber Hollow. The boy lived, but he didn't wake up right away. He stirred, shivered, twitched, spoke in half-dreams. Once he called for his mother. Once he called for Eleanor. That changed something in the air. Even the proud ones, Emery, Lyle, the trader's widow who had spoken harshly to Eleanor at the town well last fall, even they looked at her differently now. Not as a nuisance, not as a curiosity, but as something hard to name, something between a mother and a myth. And yet, Eleanor didn't bask in it. She worked, always working, drying socks, rationing food, rechecking the chimney drawer, shifting bedding to prevent mildew, shoveling snow from the secondary tunnel when it began to collapse. "She doesn't sleep," one whispered. "She does," someone else replied. "Only after we do." Then one morning, it was hard to tell which morning anymore, the youngest of the lot, a girl of 12 named Ruthie, found Eleanor crouched over a ledger by candlelight. The girl asked what she was doing. "Figuring out who gets what," Eleanor said. "For food?" "For everything." The girl stepped closer quietly. "Like fair shares?" Eleanor looked up, and for the first time, her face was tired. Her eyes were deep pools of some sorrow no child could yet name. "No child," she said gently. "Fair wouldn't keep us alive." That day, she began giving orders. The strong were told to chop more of the dried wood from the crawl space. The able-bodied had to walk in place for 10 minutes every hour to keep circulation. Water was to be heated and cooled before drinking. No more dipping from the barrel without boiling. At first, there was grumbling. "She ain't a marshal," Lyle muttered. "Ain't no elected leader," Emery snapped back. "You want elected? Fine, I vote her. You?" There was no answer, because no one else had fire. Weeks blurred. The storm did not end. Once, a knock came on the outer door. Not the tunnel, the front one, the one no one had used since the first flake fell. It was past dusk. Eleanor paused her stitching and looked toward it. Everyone else froze. The knock came again. 3 slow raps, then silence. She grabbed her old shotgun, rusted, oiled, wrapped in a cloth, and stood at the door. "Who's there?" No answer. She opened the quilt, cracked the heavy wood. Wind howled in. Snow curled like smoke into the space. A man stood there, bare-handed, beard frosted into clumps. "Please," he whispered. Eleanor didn't recognize him. He collapsed into her arms. They laid him by the boy. The stranger's hands were black at the tips, nose peeled raw, eyes yellowed. He had walked, apparently, from the southern trail, said nothing, just lay breathing like each pull of air was a punishment. 2 nights later, he spoke a name. "Clive Rowley," Eleanor whispered, remembering. He had a cabin past Widow's Point. He had a wife," someone added. "Did," Eleanor corrected. The meaning was clear. He had buried her, or left her buried, or worse, left her unburied. The next morning, Clive tried to stand. Eleanor stopped him. "You're no use out there now," she said. "I left 'em," he croaked. "Ain't no man ought to leave a wife like that." She didn't argue. She simply pulled the quilt back over him and handed him a cup. "You want to be useful?" she said. "Then eat, rest, and sharpen the blades. Spring will come, and if you want to be worth anything when it does, you'd better be ready." It was 2 more weeks before the weather changed. One morning the wind died, not entirely, but enough that they noticed. The way smoke rose a little straighter, the way they could hear the creak of distant trees again, instead of the endless shriek. Eleanor opened the rear tunnel, climbed to the surface. The snow had crusted over, thick as stone in some places. She broke through with her shovel and peered across the valley. White, endless white, but not as harsh. The sun, pale as dishwater, poked through a thin cloud veil. She came back down, said only 2 words. "It's time." Time for what? They didn't know, until she started handing out shovels. "We dig?" one asked. "No," Eleanor said. "You do. You dig out the others." "Others?" "The ones who didn't come here." And that's how they learned she had not just built a shelter. She had mapped the valley, knew every cabin, every trail, every family name. She had marked on parchment where the widows lived, where the youngest couples had settled, where a child had been born 2 months before the snow came. "We find them," she said, "or what's left. We bury them if we must, and if any still breathe, we bring them here." And they obeyed, because by now they understood this woman wasn't made from the same stock. She was born of frost and sorrow, forged in winters past that broke stronger men. She had planned not only for herself, but for them, even when they laughed, even when they scoffed. She had dug that shelter like she knew what was coming. And now she was sending them out like a general commanding soldiers in a war against the cold. They found 4 more people alive in cabins half buried. A man and his pregnant wife with no firewood left. 2 children who had been eating books. 1 infant wrapped in potato sacks. They brought them all back. Eleanor took in every single one. And when the spring finally came, slow, muddy, cautious, they emerged not as survivors, but as something closer to a people, a kind of tribe, bound by dirt walls and Eleanor Tappan's stubbornness. They rebuilt Timber Hollow, but not the way it was. They built half their cabins in the ground now. They built tunnels. They built caches. They planted trees near entrances for windbreak. They built root cellars that weren't just for roots. They called it Eleanor's Way. And when the next winter came, no one scoffed. The thaw came slow, not with spring's trumpet or bright sunbreaks, but with a strange quiet, a stillness so unnatural it unnerved the valley. It wasn't warm yet. It was merely less cold. The ice lost its edge. The snow began to sag, but the danger wasn't over. Now came the season of collapse, of runoff and rot. It was the time when roofs weakened by frost gave way, when snowmelt turned trails to quagmires and flooded those too proud to dig a proper trench. Inside Eleanor's shelter, the air grew damp. She noticed it first, the subtle change in the breath of the room. The way the salt on the shelves began to cake harder, the whisper of mold along the canvas seams. Others might have celebrated the warmth. Eleanor braced for new problems. That night she called the group together. "We rotate sleeping areas now," she said. "We'll strip the walls, let them dry, and we'll start digging a runoff channel from the western edge. But the snow's still thick up there, someone said. That's why we dig now, she replied. Before it turns to flood. No one argued anymore. By now, even the most stubborn had learned that Eleanor didn't speak for her own benefit. She spoke because she'd lived the consequences of not preparing. Every decision she made came wrapped in old pain. There were no guesses, only learned truths. They followed her out into the half-lit morning. Snow still capped the trees, but the ground groaned wet beneath the surface. Each step left a trace now. That was new. The sun hadn't broken through fully, but its pressure could be felt in the dirt. Lyle Granger, once the loudest skeptic, took the first shovel. He worked beside Emery and Clive, who had regained enough strength to swing a pick. They began to trench the slope above the shelter, guiding meltwater toward the edge of a gully Eleanor had marked months ago. It wasn't easy work. Every few feet they struck frozen layers. The sun warmed the surface, but the heart of the land was still ice. One wrong cut, one poorly braced trench wall, and the whole thing could flood their only refuge. Eleanor worked beside them, always beside them. By midday, Ruthie fainted. She had been hauling bark to line the new wall when her legs gave. Eleanor caught her just before her head hit stone. They carried her in, warmed her, fed her a thin broth. She's not starving, Emery said. We've all eaten. She's exhausted, Eleanor replied. She's young. Too much strain on too little. Then let me take her work. Eleanor turned, surprised. You've already done your part. I want hers too, Emery said. You've done enough for us. And so it began. What started as obedience shifted into something else. No longer did they just follow Eleanor's lead. They anticipated it. The older ones began carving her floor plans into scrap wood, drawing rough blueprints of her underground home to study the airflow. One man, a failed carpenter, began constructing a second storage tunnel modeled after hers. When asked why, he shrugged. She made one that lasted, he said. Ours didn't. They started calling the place the Hollow. Not just Timber Hollow, that was the valley, but the Hollow, Eleanor's Hollow, as if it were a place apart, a womb of survival, the one true shelter. And still she gave. When food ran low again, she opened the cache beneath the ash pile. No one had known it was there. A long crawl space sealed with stone and lined with straw where she'd stored dried meats and hardtack, enough to stretch another 2 weeks. They stared at her in disbelief. How did you plan this? Someone asked. She looked at them all, her face calm. I didn't plan for you. I planned for loss. This was for my children. And for the first time, they understood her silence. They found the grave a week later. Clive had been digging a drainage canal near the rear wall when his spade hit wood, not boards, a box. A small, handmade coffin, hidden in the dark earth beneath the slope, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed against time. He called Eleanor over, eyes unsure. She said nothing, just stared down, and then softly, I wondered if the ground would hold. No one asked who was inside. They knew. The way she touched the cloth told them. The way her eyes stayed distant. I buried him on the second day I arrived, she said. Didn't want a headstone. Didn't want anyone asking questions. She crouched, pulled back a corner of the wrapping, revealing the faint edge of a carved wooden toy. A tiny horse, worn from handling. He would have been 6 by now. Ruthie stepped forward, knelt beside her. I'm sorry. Eleanor placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. I'm not. He made me dig deep. He made me smart. He made me ready. They buried it again. Together this time, no words, just dirt and silence. That evening the thaw turned violent. A ridge broke loose above the eastern slope. Not a full avalanche, but enough snow and ice to collapse half the standing cabins near Widow's Point. The sky groaned like a beast, then roared as trees snapped and groaned under a sudden weight. A white wave poured into the valley. They heard it before they saw it. Eleanor screamed for everyone to get below. They slammed the tunnel doors, sealed them with furs, and braced the beams. The sound outside was thunder without end, snow against wood, earth breaking. It lasted seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt like a siege. Then silence, total, deafening silence. When Eleanor opened the door, a new world greeted her. Half the slope was gone. Where trees had once stood, there was only white, gouged earth. Her tunnel, the third one, the retrieval passage, was gone, buried. They were cut off again, but not broken, because her main shelter stood. Every brace, every angle, all of it held. The walls hadn't shifted, the roof hadn't cracked, and no one was dead. She'd built it to survive worse than a single collapse. She'd built it for grief. The next few weeks were quiet, not empty, but reverent. People moved softly in the hollow now. They whispered at night, helped each other, without being asked. The children played again, softly, near the fire. The boy, Caleb, had recovered enough to walk, though his left foot would never be the same. He followed Eleanor everywhere, asked her about digging, about smoke direction, about the stove draft. You want to learn? She asked. I want to build, he said, so she taught him. When spring finally broke, truly broke with birdsong and open sky, they emerged in waves. The snow receded like a dying tide. The valley breathed again. Trees showed bark. Rivers screamed with meltwater. Timber Hollow had changed. Cabins were half fallen. Barns buckled. Some homes were just footprints in the mud. But Eleanor's hollow remained. People began rebuilding near her, not beside her, but close, watching, imitating. They dug low, dug deep. They used the hillside. They sealed their walls. Eleanor didn't tell them how. She watched. She waited. She only spoke when asked. And when the new cabins rose, they weren't tall. They were grounded, earth-wrapped, chimneys low, roots deep. They called it digging smart. They called her the one who taught them to bury pride and build for death, so life might follow. They carved her name into a new stone, set not above a grave, but at the entrance to a communal hall they built with her plans. It read, Eleanor Tappan. She prepared when the rest of us laughed, and they didn't laugh anymore. That first spring, Timber Hollow did not erupt into bloom. It unfurled carefully, like a wounded man testing his steps after a hard fall. The land remained cautious. Snowmelt soaked the valley, turning meadows into marsh and trails into gullies. The trees leafed out late, and the few animals that emerged did so, lean and wary. Even the wind seemed tentative, no longer screaming through the pines, but whispering, as if afraid to disturb the fragile quiet that Eleanor Tappan's hollow had carved out of death. But people worked. It was a different kind of working than before, not the frantic lurching of men trying to outrun winter, not the chest-puffed performances of prideful ranchers building too big, too fast. This was slower, thoughtful, the kind of labor that begins underground, with roots, not roofs. Eleanor didn't lead it. She never stood atop a barrel and made speeches, but her presence became law. Don't build tall, Emery told one newcomer that April, when a family from East Creek tried raising a full-frame log house on stilts above the floodplain. Dig in. Build low. The earth's the only thing that doesn't get taken. You saying I should bury myself like a rat? The man laughed. Emery didn't laugh back. He simply pointed to the scar across his knuckles, a souvenir from the storm, from the frostbite that nearly cost him his fingers. Only reason I've still got hands is because I buried myself like a rat. And slowly, even the new ones listened. Eleanor remained quiet through it all. She spent most of those early spring days in the lower tunnel, reinforcing the beams that had creaked under the thaw. Caleb helped her. The boy was stronger now, though he still limped. He mimicked her silence, her rhythm, her calm. You don't tell them how to build anymore, he said one evening, as he handed her a spade. She paused, looked at him. They don't need me to, she replied. They watch now. Shouldn't you still, I don't know, teach? Eleanor wiped her brow with a threadbare cloth. Her arms were dirty to the elbows, her hair matted from days in the clay. She looked older now, not broken, just carved, shaped by a winter that had left many unrecognizable. I did my teaching in silence, she said. Still, the valley did not rest. With spring came sickness. It started as a cough in one of the new children, then a fever in her mother. By the end of the week, 4 households had reported chills, vomiting, and shortness of breath. Eleanor knew the signs. Pneumonia, likely bacterial, the kind that moved fast in damp cabins, especially in the ones where wood had begun to rot from the inside. She reacted immediately. No arguing, no meetings. She simply walked from cabin to cabin, demanded the sick be isolated in the storage room she had cleared of food and lined with bark. She burned the linens from the worst cases, boiled every cup, refused visitors. Some balked. One man, whose wife had fallen ill, tried to force his way in. She needs me, he shouted, shoving past Emery and 2 others. Eleanor met him at the inner door, shotgun in her hands. You'll see her again, she said. If you stay out, if you come in now, you'll bring it back to your children. I don't care. She didn't move. I do. He didn't push past her, not because of the gun. Because of her eyes, he left. That night his wife died, but so did the fever. Not in everyone, but the spread slowed. Of the 17 who showed symptoms, only 5 perished. In most towns that winter it would have been more than half. Eleanor treated each case herself, day and night, with willow bark, bear fat, and boiling cloth. Caleb helped when he could, as did Ruthie and Emery, but no one matched Eleanor's stamina. She's not a woman, someone whispered once. She's a whole season. It was early summer when the first traders arrived from the south. 2 wagons creaked up the muddy trail, bells ringing faintly. The men driving them looked stunned when they saw the valley wasn't empty. Most settlements had gone quiet after the great storm. Reports of deaths, abandonment, plague. The traders had brought cloth for coffins. Instead, they found gardens, not big ones, just tilled patches, some with sprouting onion grass, others with mounds for potatoes, strips of corn. Most of the homes were squat, sod-wrapped, dirt-colored things, with chimneys no higher than a man's head. But the air smelled of soup. Children's voices drifted from between trees. Smoke rose steady from hearths that hadn't gone cold in weeks. One of the traders, a man named Decker, walked beside Emery and asked how they'd survived. Emery jerked a thumb toward the hillside. We had her. Eleanor didn't greet them. She was inside, reinforcing the lintel of the root cellar. When Decker finally met her, he offered to buy her plans, blueprints, maps. We could make a fortune, he said. Name it the Tappan method. Sell it down in Denver, Amarillo, maybe even Chicago. Eleanor stared at him. I'm not interested in fortune, she said. But ma'am, it saved your whole town. It didn't save everyone, she replied. It saved enough. Decker blinked, unsure. You could change the way people live. Eleanor didn't blink. I already did. She walked away. But others took note. The drawings Emery had carved into boards were copied, passed between townsfolk. Lyle created a guide, handwritten, bound in leather, with sketches and instructions on how to build a simple two-room earth home with ventilation, fireproof walls, flood drainage, and storage tunnels. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. They began sending it with passing traders. They didn't sell it. They handed it off with jerky, salt, and bundles of dried onion. Take it, they'd say. Use it. Tell 'em it's from Timber Hollow. Soon letters came back. One from a widow near Fort Laramie. Built it just in time. Snow came early. Husband's brother called us rats till he froze in his roofless barn. Thank you. Another from a family in New Mexico. Used the drawing. Lost one cow, but no children. We'll teach the others. The word spread. The hollow became legend. But Eleanor never changed. She didn't write letters. She didn't sign the guide. She didn't pose for the drawing Lyle tried to make of her. She just kept digging. Why do you still work? Caleb asked one day. It's done. You made it. Eleanor looked up from the trench she was cutting. Winter always comes back, she said. Might not be tomorrow. Might not be this year, but it comes. He nodded and dug beside her. That fall, a new family arrived. A man, his wife, 2 daughters. Their wagon was broken, horses gaunt. They had heard of the hollow from a trapper in the north. The man stood before Eleanor, hat in hand. We ain't beggars, he said. I've got tools. I can work. She didn't ask where he was from, didn't ask what he'd lost. She simply pointed to the eastern slope. That soil holds firm. Dig deep, build low, keep your chimney short and your door facing south. The man stared, then blinked, then smiled like someone given a map out of a fire. Yes, ma'am. His daughters played in the dirt beside Ruthie. His wife wept when Eleanor handed her a jar of dried apples. That winter was mild. Not warm, but manageable. Only one heavy snow. The wind never returned to its old screaming self. People called it mercy, but Eleanor didn't relax. She doubled her stores, dug another shelter, trained Ruthie in how to spot water intrusion before it spread mold. She taught Caleb how to listen to beams, to hear when weight began to shift in the walls. And every night she sat by the fire and sharpened her spade, not because she needed to dig, because she would again, always. By the second winter, after the great storm, Eleanor Tappan had become something Timber Hollow didn't yet have a word for. She wasn't a mayor. There had never been a vote. She wasn't a preacher, a sheriff, or a leader in the way men once imagined one. But when a decision had to be made, folks looked at her. When trouble stirred, when frost threatened, when something in the air changed, people turned to Eleanor before they turned to sky, steel, or scripture. She didn't seek it. She barely spoke at gatherings, didn't sit at the head of tables, or carve her name on signs. But her presence was law, not through power, through proof, and the proof was everywhere now. Children who had nearly frozen to death now played outside her slope-sheltered cabin, chasing each other around chimneys no taller than a fence post. Smoke from more than 24 hearths rose steady into the sky, not from peaked roofs, but from soil-covered mounds. The valley, once a patchwork of sagging log homes and creaking porches, had become something new, a settlement shaped by survival, not built despite the land, but with it, almost under it. They called their homes earthbacks now. Some had small windows dug into the slope, angled just right to catch noon sun. Others used sunken entryways covered with thick hide flaps and straw-packed thresholds. The root cellars were no longer afterthoughts. They were central. Some doubled as bedrooms. Others, like Eleanor's, had 3 separate corridors: food, tools, and what she called quiet stock, the kinds of supplies that didn't rot and could be bartered in the dark season. Lantern oil, salt, thick twine, rendered fat. And though she shared her knowledge freely, Eleanor always kept a few things to herself, like the 4th tunnel. Only Caleb knew about that one. Not even Emery had seen it. It lay beneath the west alcove, behind a stack of dried pine rounds and a panel of barked cedar. The tunnel sloped steep and narrow, barely wider than a grown man's shoulders. and led to what Eleanor called her last shelter. Caleb only saw it because he had earned her trust the way few ever had, not through loyalty, but through silence. He didn't ask questions. He watched. He learned. And one day, after hauling 2 buckets of frostwood from the gully without being told, Eleanor had motioned for him to follow her. "You'll never tell anyone about this," she said flatly. "I won't. If they ask you where you sleep in the coldest weeks, you'll lie. I understand, and if I go missing for more than 3 days without a word, you'll come down here, only you." He nodded. He didn't ask why. She pushed the panel aside, lit a candle stub, and led him down into the dark. The room wasn't large, just 6 feet wide, maybe 12 long, but it was dry, bone dry. The walls had been fired, blackened with soot to harden the clay. The floor was stone. There was no stove, but the heat of the earth was palpable, trapped behind layers of insulation. Along one wall sat a single cot. Above it, a shelf. On that shelf, a journal, a wax-sealed tin box, a flintlock pistol, and a silver locket. Caleb didn't ask what was in the box. Eleanor didn't offer. She simply said, "Sometimes the worst thing a winter takes is sense. This place is for when I lose mine." Caleb blinked. "You think you'll go mad? I think I'll die. And if I don't, I might forget why I built all this." She paused. "And if I forget, this place reminds me." Caleb understood, as much as any boy could, and he never spoke of it again. That second winter was strange, not brutal, but deceptive. It came late, almost a month past the first frost, and lulled the valley into carelessness. A few families built their chimneys taller. A couple of new arrivals scoffed at the hollow way, choosing to raise walls 2 stories high with bright paint and glass pane windows. One such home belonged to the Flynns, a couple from Kansas who arrived with a mule team and too many opinions. "This valley's ripe," Mr. Flynn said to anyone who'd listen. "You people are living like burrowers. We're bringing some civilization." Eleanor never told them to stop. She didn't argue. She simply observed. When they asked for advice, she gave it. Build low, keep wood dry, insulate your bedding, use double chimneys to trap air heat. They didn't listen. By late January, the storm hit. It wasn't as deep as the Great Storm, but it was faster. A sudden wall of white blown down from the northern ridges, a howler with teeth. The Flynn's home collapsed on the second night. They survived, barely, rescued by Emery and Lyle, who had to cut a hole through the back wall with an axe. The fire had gone out by the time they arrived. The Flynn's baby girl had early signs of frostbite on her feet. Eleanor took them in. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just wrapped the baby's feet in deer fat and wool. After that, the hollow changed again. A kind of hush settled in. Not fear, not grief, just reverence. People no longer saw Eleanor's ways as brilliant. They saw them as sacred. The hollow wasn't just safe, it was alive, and Eleanor was its heartbeat. That spring, they held the first of what would later be called the Earthfire Days. It wasn't a holiday. There was no banner, no hymn, no feast, just a gathering. Families came to the center of the valley, to the ring of stones Eleanor had used for firewood, sorting back in the earliest days. They brought offerings, not to a god, but to a method. Bundles of extra kindling, dried meat, pickled vegetables, whittled toys for the children. They laid them out, not as gifts for the living, but as thanks for the lessons that let them stay alive. Eleanor didn't stand at the center. She watched from the slope. When someone finally asked her to say a few words, she declined. "I already said everything that mattered," she said. "In the dirt, in the walls." But she did allow one thing. She handed her journal, the one from the hidden tunnel, to Caleb. "You write in it now," she said. He opened the cover. The pages were filled with diagrams, notes, measurements, and stories. Not long ones, just entries. Lost root batch to damp. Must dig deeper next year. Tested straw blend with clay. Held better in north wind. Granger still talks too much, but builds well. She didn't say it aloud, but Caleb understood. He would be the next hollow. Years passed, not many, but enough. The hollow grew. More settlers came, some from as far as Utah and the Dakotas. The guides had spread. The legend had grown. Some thought Eleanor was dead, a ghost. Others thought she was a witch who'd tamed the storm. Most just wanted to learn, to build safe. Eleanor greeted each one the same. She showed them the slope. She said, "Build low, dig smart, make it hold," and then she let them choose. Not all stayed. Some couldn't stand the dirt, the humility, but those who remained became family. And Eleanor, she aged. She never married again. She never had more children, but every boy and girl born in the hollow knew her name before they knew their own. One winter, her 8th in the hollow, she fell ill. It wasn't dramatic, no coughing fits, no cries, just a slow, steady fading. Caleb sat beside her, now a man grown, his hands calloused with soil and stone. "You know the tunnels better than I ever did," she whispered. "That's not true," she smiled. "I dug them with fear. You dug yours with hope. That makes yours stronger." She passed before dawn. They didn't bury her above ground. They laid her to rest in the first tunnel, the one she built alone, when no one believed her. They sealed it with cedar, packed it with clay, and carved no marker. The hollow didn't need one, because every cabin dug low, every root cellar lined with bark, every vent angled just so, every living child was the marker, and the wind never screamed in the hollow again, only whispered her name.